Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Kate McGinley, a fractional chief growth officer and the managing principal at 210 Healthcare. Kate McGinley has been instrumental in driving revenue growth and operational excellence for health tech startups and established healthcare organizations within the healthcare strategy and digital health space. Her expertise centers at helping companies capture meaningful revenue by refining go-to-market strategies, optimizing operational workflows, and implementing scalable solutions that align with the buyer journey. Throughout her career, Kate has guided health tech startups to secure millions in contracts, supported oversubscribed funding rounds, and enabled measurable ROI through data-driven strategy. Her track record includes roles such as co-founder and chief growth officer at Tuned, where she scaled operations to support 6.4+ million contracted lives, and led partnerships for a hearing health platform recognized on the New York Digital Health 100, as well as managing principal at IG Consulting and key strategy positions at organizations including UPMC and Knowledgent. Kate's ability to operationalize value-based care models, build high-performing teams, and cultivate healthcare analytics innovations has positioned her as a leader in advancing business models that put patient outcomes and system sustainability at the forefront. McGinley's thought leadership and deep operational excellence continue to elevate digital health and healthcare delivery, making her a key force in transforming the industry through buyer-aligned growth and strategic execution. In this conversation, we discuss her extensive experience in healthcare revenue optimization and clinical entrepreneurship. She discusses the importance of redefining quality metrics, understanding payment flows, and the need for compliance in healthcare sales. Kate emphasizes the significance of building resilient teams and creating strategic relationship with payers. She also highlights the shift towards cash pay in healthcare and the role of fast followers in innovation. Lastly, throughout the discussion, she provides valuable insights for founders navigating the complexities of the healthcare landscape. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Kate tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Kate, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Loved jamming with you last time and, excited to continue. So my background is healthcare. My focus is really on revenue in healthcare, both strategic revenue optimization and then net new. Started clinically at University of Pittsburgh Medical Centers, which I always say was the best place to launch a career in healthcare. Worked as a nursing assistant and then moved up through the organization to eventually help with enterprise initiatives that led to some of the commercialization that occurs out of UPMC. That took me into management consulting, where I advised a number of major payers as well as academic and community medical centers and healthcare systems on their approach to strategy and how that ties with other operational initiatives. And then that took me to the world of startups, where I was largely in charge of growth and various growth initiatives as I came up through the organizations. Super proud of what I've done. I had one organization. They were a larger entity, but they realized over $1 billion in net new revenue after I developed a strategy for them within 3 years. Impacts on startups, 0 to 6.4 million lives, like pre-product, pre-revenue to 6.4 million lives in under 3 years. And that was really exciting and impactful, building out everything from operations to the clinical team to the sales and marketing strategy, market selection. These days, I am on a mission to help clinical entrepreneurs really achieve the impact that they are looking to achieve in the healthcare industry. I fundamentally believe that our industry is not going to change unless we have more clinical entrepreneurs, because healthcare comes down to the interaction between the patient and their doctors and nurses who are caring for them. So that's me.
Very strong background. Typically, we like to do an icebreaker here. And so
Yeah.
going off into that, my icebreaker for you is if you could, choose any three, opportunities that some might label them as moonshot opportunities, right, to maximize behavioral change and not just clinical outcomes, what would they exactly be? What type of incentives would they really work on and why?
I have $100 million to play with. Yes.
And you have $100 million to play with. Yeah.
Okay. So I think behavioral change in healthcare, we need to think about it differently. I think we put a lot of onus on the patient or member to change their behavior. And so I would start with 400 million for clinical, or no, 40 million for clinical entrepreneurship initiatives. I think, like I said earlier, that is how we change healthcare. I would do 40 million into changing our quality metrics. So what I mean by changing, I mean redefining. As a culture, we really tend to focus on quantitative outcomes, not qualitative. So things like life extension versus life enhancement. And there's a big difference when it comes to health. And then finally, for my last 20, I would redesign workplace health. And what I mean by that is today we do a lot of things like step counters for, premium deductions or discounts, whatever. But what we fundamentally need to do is to make the workplace and our communities healthier. And that requires a lot more change than, say, a point solution. So that's how I'm spending my money.
Good options.
Thanks.
I want to tie that into some of the experience that you kind of mentioned on before. Is I know you've worked on, enterprise scale solutions, D2C, commercialization, also clinical operations. What about your foundational experience, really helped taught you on, what the healthcare system works, the insides and outs, and where you've really seen challenges?
Yeah. So I think everybody gets into healthcare because they want to make a difference, right? We all do. And it was really great to see clinical care in such a high acuity inpatient and innovative environment, right? Lots of clinical trials. And I saw the best of humanity there, right? So it was during that time working clinically that I was like, healthcare can truly be a force for good, even though we all get frustrated with it and how expensive it is. So that's my one answer, was that clinical experience. And then I would say the other piece of it was when I went into management consulting, I was very fortunate to have a mentor who took me under his wing, and I got the best education you can imagine in how funds flow through the entire industry into esoterica that most folks don't even know about it. He had worked for Goldman Sachs prior. He had started his own companies. And so it was just understanding how the financial flows coupled with, hey, this can be a force for good, but hey, this is what reality looks like at the bedside. Those were the two, I think, foundational moments in my healthcare career, and taught me to see the whole picture.
What did you think about, the interconnective incentives versus, the siloed aspects of healthcare, and maybe the parts that people aren't take the appreciative of?
Yeah. I think one of the fundamental pieces of entrepreneurship, clinical entrepreneurship in healthcare is very much, really, let me take a step back. Any entrepreneurship in healthcare is understanding payment flows, right? Because it is through that things are interconnected. And I will give you an example. When an employer contracts for healthcare services, when one talks about, impacts 10 years down the road, the average employee tenure is 2 years. Now, very fortunately, many employers and total rewards leaders are recognizing that, if we work together and I sponsor this program, you in my industry sponsor this program. At the end of the day, people don't really change industry, so we can both enjoy the results. But that has not always been the case, and that's still not true everywhere. And so when we talk about these long-term impacts, the employer market won't necessarily respond the way you think they will because they're only paying for the health of someone for the next 2 years, right? So it's a bet effectively. It's things like that really need to be understood to see the interconnection between how healthcare is paid for versus what is delivered.
I know when we discussed as well, you spoke about market architecture for startups.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, like, what are the three elements of winnable niches, in comparison to maybe the quicksand aspects of healthcare that can actually help, leaders and startup founders actually create winnable solutions?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and that ties to who pays, right? And because who pays is who gets value from it. And so one of the things that I'm always coaching on and working to build towards is how are you aligning with the market, right? So the innovation, new technology, whether it's AI or whether it's a life sciences type breakthrough, what the market in the US who pays for healthcare is buying is not necessarily that technology, is that technology plus ensuring compliance with the regulatory complexity that is the healthcare industry, right? The product is two pieces. It's not just the innovation, it's also all of the operations that go into delivering that innovation, right? And so you must align for that market reality, and that is the market architecture, right? Which market, based on your team and based on your offering, is going to be the best for what you're, trying to bring into the world, and then engineering around that. I think another piece that is emerging much more clearly now is that moats today, and I think for the next several years, what being the infrastructure that folks can build on. Consumer SaaS has certainly had its moment, the Apple App Store, all these other like creator type sites. Shopify was another one. Healthcare hasn't necessarily had those rails to build on, and you're starting to see those infrastructure plays emerge. And to me, that's something that's very exciting.
I know something that I spoke to another leader about is, the part of where reimbursement plays a part, right? And kind of, I think, hones into the aspect of, payment is, and what they were saying is, hey, the only way that we're actually going to find real solutions is if we can actually solve that. What are your thoughts there, and how critical is that? And maybe why is that?
Yes. So I have a piece coming out, and I'll post snippets about it on LinkedIn, but definitely it's going to be on my Substack. Reimbursement has changed, right? And the folks who have realized it are already leaps and bounds ahead of those who think we're still in, a fee for service or even value-based care type world. What I see is very much a cash pay world, right? We have plenty of evidence. If you look at the valuation of Function Health, if you look at the success Mark Cuban is having, if you look at the success of the ICRA markets, Ventor just raised 20 million, and they're working with, JP Morgan, which is an enormous company. Plus, there are others there. You look at the growth in DPC. Their CAGR mimics that of the web, circa like 1994. 1996 and has since 2017. The shift has occurred. You have the working well opting out of commercial insurance. And historically, that has underpinned, that's underpinned the healthcare market for years, right? Organizations need to be mindful of sometimes it's appropriate to contract in yesterday's world, the fee-for-service VBC type of arrangements, but the smart organizations are already looking at what happens if and when we go to what is effectively a cash pay market. Because it is coming. Like mathematically, we're there. And I would say that the clearest indicator of that too is if you look at SMB offerings of commercial insurance, 39% have dropped out. And that historically, because they're fully funded, been where the margins have been in the commercial market.
Just out of curiosity as well, how does this maybe tie into, self-insured plans?
Yeah. So self-insured, typically those are larger organizations, although certainly small groups can and do come together and function as a self-insured type entity. And so when you look at self-funded employers, they are running into the same financial challenges, right? I mean, though there are a couple different ways to self-fund, and certain groups have their money sitting in the trust and it's untouchable. But then you have others where it's basically coming out of general, accounts to fund healthcare, and so that is a very real margin squeeze. Those need to be fairly liquid accounts, and so what I'm seeing there is a lot of innovative, I wouldn't call it gap insurance style products, but offerings where you can, through financial engineering, offer a really rich benefit to your employees, but offset your liability between, the 9,200 ACA deductible and what the plan is paying for care for employees. One play I'm seeing is the financial engineering, and then I am seeing appetite from employers to finally contract with health systems, right? Before it was point solutions, but I think now you have health systems wanting to do it. You have employers who, through their work with point solutions, they have a framework for successful multi-specialty direct contracting. And so that's really the plays I see self-funded employers running to help keep their healthcare costs down.
As well, tying this to some of the experience that you have mentioned previous in this conversation, that you've been on the buyer side, which is the enterprise, right? And some on the seller side when, that comes down maybe to a startup. And so what's maybe the counterintuitive mismatch that you've really seen when it comes down to how innovators actually pitch their solutions to these organizations, and how someone like a health system actually goes about evaluating them?
Yeah. So let's look at the three big markets for healthcare, and if we have time, I'll do D2C. The commonality between health systems, payers, and employers: risk management. Full stop. So first layer is, what is the innovation, right? And is it innovative? Fantastic. Second layer is, what percentage of my population is it going to affect? What is my ROI? And there are different mechanisms for that, as you can imagine, for each of those entities. But then what I would say, think of it like an iceberg. What you don't see, which is, how are you going to ensure, even though you're a startup, that there are no compliance or regulatory mishaps? And that's where having a really strong compliance posture from the jump is incredibly helpful, because in healthcare, your regulations are your revenue, full stop, right? And when you understand that and when you architect for that, that is when you can meaningfully move as fast as our industry's sales cycles will.
We had spoken as well, that sometimes startups actually treat compliance as just a checkbox.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how can leaders and organizations in these, when they're thinking about their go-to-market strategies, actually treat, regulatory hurdles actually as a competitive moat?
Yeah. So I speak to that. Lead to it, right? Lead with it. This is where you will always have insiders wanting to help, right? I think healthcare people, I know the care delivery side folks will hate me for saying this, but payer folks are incredibly gracious, generous, super helpful with their time, and vice versa, right? I mean, there is so many great people within this industry who want to help, particularly folks who maybe are new to the revenue side of healthcare. So I would say to founders, have those conversations early. Have those conversations around what is important, right? You don't have a limited budget. You can't do everything, but there are certain components that you absolutely need to be able to do day one. And then there are certain components that can wait until you're getting into the large employer, the jumbo employer, mom knows them, household names, and just stair step that, right? And folks are very willing to tell you how and when to do that, but you have to ask. The other piece, and this is kind of a last resort, go sell. go sell and see what questions you actually get in that sales process. See who is invited into the room. A lot of times I find folks who will reach out to me and say, hey, it's my value proposition. It's not a value proposition. It's that you're not contractable right now because you're doing things like talking about value-based care, but you impact a Medicaid population where that's not going to resonate with the payer or with anyone who's contracting for that population, right? So it's these types of things that founders can do. Ask for help, get help, or just go start selling. But stop fairly quickly, because in healthcare, second chances can be tough to come by,
Right.
particularly if you are perceived as a regulatory concern.
Can you dive into that deeper? The second chances are hard to come by. So, maybe a startup might say, hey, Kate, but we have this challenge and we can't do this because XYZ. Could you dive in depth on that part, if you understand where I'm coming from?
I do, yeah. So it is 100. Let's use a prime example, right? So with the Consolidated Appropriations Act, employers have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees' healthcare dollars. And now there are some carve outs of that, and we can get into nuances. Lawyers, don't come at me. I'm helping founders right now. But so basically they've got to treat, total rewards people have to treat their health benefit plan just like they treat the 401k, right? It's your money. And falling under this legislation, what happens is you have founders go, and the employer says, well, what about population health data? How am I going to get utilization? How am I going to get claims? And the founders don't have an answer for that. And they'll say things like, well, claims are dumb. I can't stand claims, or we're not doing insurance. So why would we need claims? Because the claims are or pop health data, there's ways to do it very simply, but that employer has to know how is this money being spent? What is the return? Are my employees using it? What kind of value are they getting out of it? Right. And it's historically that mechanism that allows those employers to understand that. So, I mean, that's just one piece of the puzzle, but a very concrete thing where at the end of the day, if you don't have that under the CAA, that total rewards person is personally liable. Like, he or she can go to jail for not having exercise their fiduciary duty to the plan. Make sense?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Speaking on finances as
Yeah.
well, right? I know you've built, 94 million plus in pipeline, right? That's a quite astronomical figure. And so when it comes down to it, actually working with these organizations, how do you go about, translating such a number into actual tangible ROI and incentives and outcomes that resonate with somebody that's in a CFO position or, a procurement committee?
So one of the things I always talk about in the healthcare sales cycle, particularly in enterprise, in the health systems, when you are selling to a health system, the minute you pull a clinician out for a sales conversation, they are losing revenue. We're still largely in a fee-for-service world, or even if they're cash pay, like time is money. And so you need to be very respectful and deliver value in every single conversation and recognize how much money you are pulling out of their organization to sit down and talk with you, right? So when you do your market selection, when you do your go-to-market, can you deliver that level of value today to command price X? And it's okay to add on down the line. It's totally okay to increase your average contract value through more modules down the line, right? But being very mindful of what price point should we be at? What value are we delivering? Absolutely capture that value for yourself. But then during the sales cycle, recognizing that when clinicians are involved, that is their revenue you're pulling from them. And then also, one of the tips I give is think about the dollar value of everyone in the room, right? So all the executives, all the folks who are going to be, hands-on in this engagement, right? Their salary, and healthcare that's a long cycle, and there's a lot of stakeholders, right? And so making sure that you are sitting at the right level of the organization to have that conversation most cost effectively, both for you and and for your client partner. So I would say those have been two big pieces to success in driving pipe and then, subsequently closing deals. I would say the last thing too is tying to their incentives. And this is why market selection is so critically important, but it is such a misunderstood and missed step. When you look at how the various, call them archetypes of industries, so your health system, your payer, your employer, how they are incented is very, very different. And there are many nuances using the payers, right? There's Medicare Advantage, there's Medicaid, there's commercial, under commercial, there's level, there's fully, there's self-insured. There are a ton of different flavors for how these organizations generate revenue. Make sure you're tying to that, right? How are you helping them grow their business too, right? That's a good partnership. And so those are, I think, the three critical pieces to moving from, really, really good sales or smaller size sales into large enterprise, multi-year type deals.
Besides, speaking on the incentives part, I think some of the advice you gave, also can be targeted towards health plans, right? And the payer
Oh, yeah.
side. And
Yeah.
so what would be maybe the advice that you'd give to founders there? Who should they really be thinking of speaking to, right? Because again, time is money. So
Yeah.
how's that work?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's let's say we've done a market selection and payers are right for you, right? So we're going to want to know what segment of the payer, right? Someone who has P&L responsibility, it's a couple people actually do, over commercial, over Medicare, over Medicaid. So let's use a Medicare Advantage lines right now, right? They've been in things. Okay. So what I want to do, I want to make sure I have talked with at least the chief medical officer of the plan. I'm going to start there. I'm going to get compliance involved the minute the CMO gives me her word, like, yes, we're interested in this. Let's get another conversation. I am proactively asking to get compliance involved in the solution. Same thing with procurement as a just in case. I'm going to want to make sure that I am working with whoever sits out the payer's captive sales agents, right? Because we're going to need to work together. These agents, whether it's embedded in the product or whether it's, there's a million ways to do it, whether it's standalone or the member doesn't even know about it, making sure that those folks know what's involved. You're going to want to talk with medical economics in at least the second, at the latest, third conversation, right? How are you impacting the medical loss ratio for the better? If you're coming out of the administrative budget, like what are some downwind effects for the medical loss ratio that they can expect? And then I'm absolutely talking with any operational teams that are involved, like if prior auth needs to be involved or if IT is almost always going to be involved. Network contracting is another one, VPs of network contracting, right? But making sure I am getting all the nuts and bolts in the payer side into the sales conversation, because it's not just one person saying yes, it's multiple departments saying, this makes sense for us as an organization and it fits into my workflow in a way that is not that that is appropriate for the level of impact that this solution is delivering. So that's how I'm gonna be thinking about the deal.
Tying that together, I also wanted to hit on, you working in the D2C startup. And I know with the D2C startup as well, you did something pretty amazing, which is 6.4 million lives covered. What is maybe some brutal truths that founders should know, about benefit design and ERISA funding when it comes down to it
Yeah.
and making that transition,
Yes. Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing when it comes to, we'll start with ERISA. One, figure out real fast if you're an accepted benefit or a non-accepted benefit. A lot of sales leaders have experience with one or the other, and they will, till they're blue in the face, try and convince you that the other side is harder to sell. They're both equally challenging to sell. It's just a different conversation. I've sold both. And so one, as a founder, you want to figure out where you sit. What bucket are you coming out of? Sometimes it's called wellness. That's one, or that's called ERISA, major medical, but there are two buckets. Which one do you fit? That's your ERISA play. The minute you know that, you can start to have a lot better conversations. And then the other piece in terms of benefit design, do everything you can in the early days. So like pre-Series A, to not need a carve out, right? That employer, when they think about their benefits, they are looking holistically. What are we paying major medical for? What other point solutions do we have? It is the world's work to get them to go to United or whoever, right? Whoever their major medical carriers are, and say, actually, carve this out. I mean, that is a big, 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 big lift. And oftentimes they'll get no. So really think about when you look at your MSA or your, summary, your SPD, your summary plan benefits, that document, are you accepted benefit, non-accepted benefit? And then if you're pre-Series A, are you requiring a carve-out lift? Try not to. I wouldn't. Unless you're really delivering like wildly impactful ROI or really impacting the health of their population.
For my own sake as well, I'm wondering, what do you think, leaders maybe don't know about a D2C commercialization and also the regulatory handles that, you have to face on that side of things? Because you're dealing with a whole different type of, consumer population on that side
Yes.
versus when it comes down to enterprise and,
I think so. This is where I think a lot of the smart money is going to cash pay and D2C, because the regulatory onus isn't as high as it is for the traditional, insurance world. A lot of the regulations around D2C products are tied up, not in CMS or in necessarily the IRS, but, the FTC and the FDA. So that's, you're going to want folks who are well versed in selling in those environments and doing compliance in those environments. I would say that's a big one. Another piece is there is still a lot of patchwork, state by state from a D2C perspective. And so being very mindful and typically geographically driven with your initial go to market when you're thinking about D2C is definitely the smarter play, particularly if any kind of care delivery is involved in the offering. Those would be my two biggest things that I would say, hey, think about this.
I know you advise founders as well to build into the complexity, right? And so what advice do you usually give to founders, typically if they're being too rigid versus maybe too reactive to market feedback, regardless if it's, B2B?
So first off, it's that I've been there, I've done it, I get it. We all do it. It's okay. The thing is realizing that you need to switch horses midstream, to use a terrible metaphor. And really it is being very mindful of your sales metrics, communicating well with the folks who are on your board, your peers, particularly if you have board members or folks involved who are new to healthcare. They don't understand the duration of sales cycle. They don't understand that, brokers aren't typically going to give you millions of clients right away, right? You're going to have a whole year where you just get a trickle. And if you do well, that's when the spigot turns on. But don't expect to realize revenue, like it's a D2C offering. So I would say really being thoughtful in terms of your board composition, really being thoughtful in balancing the reality of the situation and pairing it with education for those who maybe need some, just to learn that it is a very different industry. And, that's the thing. The complexity is what makes it beautiful. When you can preemptively jam about, the team's value-based care contract that CMS just released. And, this is how we're going to supercharge your organization's, margins on patients through like this, that, AI activated, whatever. That is a very different conversation than coming in and saying, we help older people. So not saying it's good or it's bad, but it's just, there's a lot more trust when you're coming in as someone who gets it, as someone who can be a peer and can genuinely help their organization grow.
When it comes down to, building, what is maybe some of the scarce issue that you see in post-Series A teams, health tech teams, when it comes down to it, and what really, derails them from scaling, right? And how do you go about really helping them rebuild their operational DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. So Series A, you've definitely been you've definitely been successful with revenue, and either you've got solid product market fit, or I've seen some companies where they're doing well, they raised A, but they're still maybe figuring out exactly what the market selection is, right? And so when you get to that point, that's another opportunity to spend time on market architecture and optimization. Like, okay, we have this base of clients. Where exactly do we deliver the most value? Either one, it'll give you a sense of keep going on this market, but these are the adjacent markets that we can expand to. Or two, we're kind of between three markets, but this one has some type of consistency. So let's put a lot of our chips in on this one specific bet. I would say the founders who don't do that well do tend to be the ones who maybe struggle to continue to grow with their company.
Currently, I've been fascinated with, the Epic Systems founder, Judy Faulkner,
Judy, yeah.
and the way she's kind of built her organization, right? And the tenacity that it takes, to me, is kind of remarkable. And obviously, I know she had 70K 1979 to build her organization. So you could say that was maybe a substantial money at that time. But I think regardless, it doesn't take anything away from her. What do you think maybe founders in building in health tech can maybe replicate from her own experience? She kind of bootstrapped her way up. She didn't really use founding. Is it just, it's a different time and maybe you can't replicate that? Or do you think there's actually things that founders can learn from her?
So, so a couple things. I'd love to share, but I didn't ask him. I talked with a founder yesterday in health tech. He is a nurse. He has bootstrapped his company to 700,000 in ARR. He's going to hit 1 million this year, and I am so happy for him. So proud of him. Uh, I do think very much it is possible to do today. Starting with less, right? So, um, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll be announcing we're working together shortly, and I'll ask him. But it is definitely possible. So that's one. With respect to Judy, and my circa 2012 on a night shift. I hate this thing. Click through the buttons. But she is a heck of a smart woman, and one of the things I think that she realized before most was that, fundamentally, health systems share a lot of similarities, and that is great for, software. Revenue cycle is revenue cycle is revenue cycle, and the fields are the same, right? And that is the operational backbone of a health system. And so when you look at her strategic insight, it was really about the importance of revenue cycle to healthcare and how that would, particularly in an insurance-based world, how much the importance of that would grow over the years. So she's done an amazing job, and as a woman, I salute her. But I also know about 14 physicians who are like, I'm designing my own EMR. And that's exciting too. Look at what, Chat GPT is doing to Google.
I think also something I wanted to speak upon, from the founder startup side of things is how can you really build, a team that can stick with you, right, throughout the process. I was speaking to, another leader at one point, and she said one thing that she learned is that, you need people that can stick it out and they know why they're sticking it out in healthcare to be able to survive and really build great stuff. So maybe what's your advice and perspective in building a great team in healthcare that can deliver great solutions?
Yeah. So, and this is another one of my biggest career regrets, not taking the time up front to really know yourself and to really know what your goals are for the company. Culture is everything, particularly in the early days, particularly when things get hard. Again, healthcare people, if you're clinical, you've done a night shift, you've worked overnights, you've worked a 16, 24, sometimes 36-hour shifts. Grit, to my mind, is almost never the question for folks. But are we culturally aligned in the sense of what is your working style, right? Do you like, do you demand, excellence from the start? Like you're one of those like A players, A players, A players all the time, type of people? Or are you much more, do you operate better in a more cohesive environment, like of a mix of people? There is no wrong answer. But as a founder, if you don't know that about yourself, you are going to struggle to hire. So that's one piece of it. And then another piece of it is your goals for the company. And that is a big one. I have seen many founders where they're taking venture capital. They talk about big returns, but they won't make the tough decisions that are necessary to get there. Sometimes it means firing people who've been with you since the start or letting them go. Sometimes it means delegating things that you really love to do and your entire career, you've been the best at it. I mean, it can mean a lot of different things, right? But being very honest with yourself about, do you want a lifestyle business? Do you want to take this thing to maybe Series A and then sell it? Do you really want to go the distance and IPO this puppy? Like, you need to know that from the start. What are you working towards? Because there are very different decisions that each one will require of you during the journey.
Yeah, the sacrifice that it takes
Yes.
to build something.
Yes. Yeah.
I think to build something great in healthcare, can an organization really survive if you maybe don't have only A players? I know you talked about building that cohesive team. What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a good question. Can it survive? Yes, 100%. Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt, organizations can survive. I think there is a stretch in the middle. Let's say, I would say, I would say seed to B, where you really need folks who are A players. And what I mean by A players is not necessarily, I've done this before, this is my third time around, right? I am talking about A players in the sense of take a lot of personal pride in their work, highly curious, and very proactive, right? So if I don't know something, I'm going to go, I'm going to look it up, I'm going to check with somebody who does know, and then I'm going to come back to say, like, here's what I think. Can you double check it? Not folks who are like, tell me what to do. Like, management is one thing. Hey, did you hit your metrics? These are your targets. How can I help you? How can I get blockers out of your way? I mean, absolutely. But um, that is probably the most important duration in a venture-backed company's life cycle. And that is the point where you have to have, I would say, world-class self-starters, which is a different way I think of thinking about A players during that period of time if you want to succeed and go beyond that.
I know we mentioned things around funding, right? And I know you've guided from pre-seed to Series A. And so one question I have for you on that side is, what's a fatal flaw that you see in the founder investor alignment and how that really goes about and when you have to, potentially turn companies around operationally?
It really comes down to It actually comes down to when funding is initially happening. And what I mean by that is, as a founder, you really do want to be mindful about who is around your table, on your cap table. I have had the privilege of working with some awesome venture capitalists who have been, I mean, just incredible. Door opening. I think the world of them. And, I've seen sometimes things not go so well. And so be mindful and be open and honest about, hey, this is what I'm looking for. If it's capital, call it out. If it's, I also need, operational support, call it out. If it is, I believe that your firm offers us an unfair advantage because some of your LPs are in a target market, call that out because it is a long-term relationship. And you both want to know what you are getting into. And that is where the misalignment occurs, both during the pitch as well as during the relationship. In the pitch, founders pitch to firms where the seed, the investment thesis, and you can generally reverse engineer roughly what that might be from publicly, available data, social media postings and the like. But fundamentally like a misalignment between the firm and what the founder is pitching That's one. But then on the back end, once they are at the table and they're involved in the company, really being mindful of your revenue generation and setting the expectations. And I think, if there is miscommunication there, which happens, it's business, but that's really where things start to go sideways really, really fast. So I would say it's at that moment as you're getting the funding together, we're talking terms, you've got the term sheet for review, like the end of that pitch, we're moving forward in DD, have those conversations about what are you looking for if you want to prevent misalignment on the line.
I know one thing that I like that you do is that, you apply behavioral economics and game theory to strategy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you look at it and when you see certain models in healthcare, maybe as it pertains to, value-based care, what are maybe certain tertiary effects that potentially keep you up at night when you think about them?
A lot. So I would say one of the things that I think about, and I would say I don't, is not a tertiary effect any longer. Some IDNs and payers have really taken advantage of the opportunity, but not everyone has yet. But the volume of data from VBC contracts, it is a massive amount of data that goes into these contracts. And when you think about emerging technologies, when you think about AI, what happens when you have data sets that can be used to really steer health, both from a consumption perspective, a payment perspective, a physical perspective. And I think those are some ethical questions that we as a society need to answer. I'm working with a group out of the Bay Area. It's a consortium of CMOs, researchers, health executives, and leaders, where we're building a framework for AI in healthcare and what is ethical and how does an organization need to adopt AI, but then also deploy AI. And a lot of it centers around, gosh, we have all this data with our value-based contracts. What might we do with it? And so I think that's a really important conversation that we need to have.
What makes that data so valuable, and what ideas are you guys really throwing around that you can maybe do with it?
Well, so I'll tell you a favorite story from back in, say, the year, but it was a long time ago because everybody would go look at my LinkedIn and be like, ooh. So no, actually it fits under my management consulting, so nobody would know. Well, anyway, okay. So this organization was pulling in data from, this is before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, anything, pulling in data from social media profiles and LexisNexis and consumer data around, what magazines are you subscribing to, right? They found a predictive correlation between certain data elements and when an individual would have a heart attack. They knew about 6 months beforehand, hey, Mrs. Jones is probably going to have an MI. What do you do with that, right? And healthcare is not, this isn't Apple. This is not Microsoft. This is not Amazon. Like, the market caps are not, so, and this was years ago, right? And so value-based care has exploded the amount of data available about our patients and about our members. And you can very much be a force for good with that. Get Mrs. Jones into the cardiologist, like health system, payer, hand in hand, like we all win if she's healthy. Or you can also have a mercenary style outlook. Well, Mrs. Jones is in a fee for service contract and she's under commercial, so we're not liable. I'm not saying anybody would do that or did do that, but I do think we need to have rails in place within our own organizations around, hey, how are we responsible with the use of data and what we create? And that's just one, just one example. It can be a force for good or force for otherwise.
Yeah, it's a great topic. And I think talking about people coming together, what have you really seen? And I know you warn against, co-creation theaters. What have you really seen produces a great symbiotic relationship versus, resource drains, maybe when it comes down to health systems and maybe also payers as well?
Yeah. So the best relationships I have seen on the payer side are well tied to the payer's strategic goals. That is hands down always true. One of the big things coming out of AHIP last week, which is a great payer conference for founders to go to, is member engagement, right? Member churn it's going to be a big problem. It is a big problem, right? But it's going to be an even bigger problem. When you tie to strategic initiatives like that, when you impact strategic initiatives like that, you can land and expand, or you have a lot easier, a lot better relationship and a lot better conversation with payers, both from a sales and from an account management, customer satisfaction perspective, and sometimes investment if you're doing really well. So that's on the payer side. On the provider side, I would say, again, biggest thing there tying into their strategic goals. Academics, financials are usually a biggie. If you can tie into research, accelerating patient volume is a perennial winner for any type of health system. But really, continuing to tie into the strategic goals of the organization with respect to what your offering brings to the table. When I talk about value co-creation, my rants are always that, and I shouldn't call them rants, they're realities, but the infrastructure of healthcare is really hard to change. Like, you are not going to redesign a claim. It's not happening. The government has standard files. I think that would be a great project. Maybe can I pull back some of my 100 million out for I don't know, put 5 million towards claim redesign? Now, i- there billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars and mind hours have been spent on this is the way broad strokes healthcare works. And it is really tough to change those individual mechanisms, right? You're not going to change a claim. You're not really going to change how a claim is adjudicated. You're not going to change a summary, how a summary plan document is written. You're not going to change how an eligibility file flows or what it flows from, right? And so really focus on your core competencies so that you're not coming in and saying to a payer, we'll co-design a claim with you. That you are you're done. The meeting is over. You are never talking to them again. Just no, don't do that.
Yeah.
Do not do that. So
Yeah. And I think talking about, the experience about, building, when assessing fast followers in certain markets, what signals do you usually look at for maybe opportunistic copycats versus strategic accelerators?
So I would say when something is genuinely innovative, this is where, in healthcare in particular, unless that founding team has very deep healthcare experience, and I want to be a little bit broad with the founding team, right? I'm talking about the founders. I'm talking about those first 5 hires and the board cap table, right? I would say it is a smarter play to be a fast follower with incredible innovation versus some of the more still very meaningful, still very profitable, but more iterative type of solutions. So, and I'll give you for instance, when you look at revenue cycle management, I would not say that there has been particularly a 0 to 1. It's been a lot of incremental improvement, new technology, and so now we can do this and you're 10 times faster, but you're still doing the same thing. I think what we will see on the clinical side is innovation. I think when we think about care delivery, there are a lot of opportunities and appetite for significant innovation. Let's be clear, I'm talking about AI there. But I strongly believe that fast followers will probably do better simply because the stakes are so high and mistakes are very tough to overcome in clinical care delivery. So that's how I'm thinking about fast followers versus others in healthcare.
Would there be advice that you'd give them in creating their competitive moat?
If you're a fast follower,
Correct.
go fast. So no, I would say, the biggest thing when you're fast following is to really pay attention to your competitors, right? And doing that not just from a go look at their collateral, go download their white paper, blah, 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 but talk with their customers, start talking with their customers, right? Really asking, what did you like? What did you don't like? What's stopping you from implementing them, right? I mean, almost pushing to get them implemented so that you can uncover like why the market hasn't yet. And you can close that gap really, really quickly. Or it will tell you, oh goodness, like do not step into this because it is a hornet's nest. And hey, engineering, this is now item number one on the roadmap because it just killed, so and so down the road. So I think it's really paying attention to the market again, not just go looking at who is my competitor, but really what is driving buyer behavior.
Having worked in 50 plus funds, what are some outdated theses that you see that maybe health tech investors still hold in 2025?
So working with investors, I see. I would say there is still a surprising appetite for go-to-market motions that, the buyers are literally signaling like, we're done here. And I'm talking specifically about employers. That surprises me. Like, are there plays for the employers? Absolutely. We talked about some of them. Infrastructure is a big one. Benefits administration, absolutely. But another point solution, that's a tough sell right now. Not to say it can't be done. Not to say you can't even go to market with employers, but it's a different motion. Knocking on the door of Benefits Betty versus going to channel partners to distribute at scale, right? Different things are working today. So I would say that's one. I would say, I do think the tide is turning. There is much more of a appetite for innovation now where, funds are beginning to take risks again. They are beginning to invest again. They are not they're looking for, blockbuster returns, again, moonshots, if you will, versus kind of efficiency gains and traditional like, hey, this can be this can and will be a winning play, but maybe not taking it to, how do we go to the moon on this thing? And that's a shift. I would say that's probably only this last quarter that's really manifested.
I know also when we discussed, you mentioned infrastructure as a unique wedge. And so what layer of maybe the healthcare tech stack do you think presents maybe the highest leverage opportunity?
So I see a lot of innovation in the usual, operations, revenue cycle management, medical ratio management, things like that. I am personally very interested in risk management for employers and for provider organizations, right? So health systems. And I don't mean like, are we compliant? I'm talking about an actuarial model in terms of population risk, like basically bringing what the payers have and have used all day every day to the health systems and to the employers because they have to better manage that risk stock. So that's an area that I think is going to grow significantly over the coming decade.
Now, my last question for you before we go on to the lightning round is if you could maybe obsolete one archaic healthcare workflow, maybe such as prior auth, through emergent technology, what would you target and how would you kind of go about replacing it?
So I know everyone's going to expect me to say the facts, but I would say the pickle phone. So the pickle phone, for those who don't know, it looks like a Nokia from like, I don't even know when, like no screen, like it's not an iPhone or anything, like literally like it's 2006, right? And a lot of nurses and patient care techs and nursing assistants and phlebotomists and janitors and I mean everybody I think except for maybe like the doctors, NPs and PAs have these in hospital systems. And when you are delivering clinical care, it is really frustrating to be in the middle of vital signs, in the middle of helping a patient walk, in the middle of hanging bags and your phone goes off. And it goes off for everything from I want a turkey sandwich. Do you want to come and get lunch in the cafeteria with me. Somebody's having a code, right? And we need you here now, right? So you cannot like just let it go. That it would be amazing from a workplace satisfaction perspective, from a patient experience perspective. And I absolutely believe clinical and financial outcomes if someone could reinvent that. So like anyone who does like telephony or like phone design, like Johnny Ives, I have a project for you. It's the
Cool.
pickle phone.
Now it's time for the lightning round. And so my first question for you is maybe what's one overlooked skill that a founder could have when they're selling to enterprise health tech sales?
Compliance management, biggest one.
Can you
You will
explain that
not
a little
lose.
bit more?
Oh yeah. If you talk about how your system is compliant, and I'm not talking HIPAA SOC 1 to SOC 2. I'm talking about workflows, how you ensure the partner is compliant with what they need to do. If you can do that, that is when you get a second chance when they pass by, right? If they're like, no, you'll get a second chance, right? But you have got to have that piece. It is that again, it is what these people are buying. It is the cool new solution and that big underneath the iceberg of compliance, workflows, operations that mitigate their risk. That's the biggest one.
Okay. My next question for you is what 2025 regulatory shift do you think will cause the biggest rethink in health plans?
The thing I'm focusing on from a regulatory perspective is some of these CAA lawsuits that are wending their ways through the courts. Chris Deegan is great to follow on if you're not aware of these, but employees are now suing their employers for that fiduciary duty that we talked about. And employers are going after the plans because they're recognizing, again, we are personally liable here. So a lot of these are progressing. They're beginning to go to trial. I mean, they've been around, the suits have been around for a couple years, but if you haven't started to follow, I would 100% focus on these lawsuits. And the person I follow about this is Chris Deegan.
And my last one is a fun one. It's complete this sentence. Okay. If I see one more startup start blank, I know they have not talked to another single benefits administrator.
If I see a startup try to accept Stripe as payment from employers, health systems, or payers, I know they haven't talked to a single benefits administrator.
That's a good one. Can you explain why to the audience?
So the funds that are used to pay for healthcare are not attached to the company credit card. Typically, there are a million reasons for that. And payment is not as simple because there are so many intermediaries involved in the payment process that it is not as simple as a credit card transaction. Having said that, though, I think maybe you and I just came up with a new business idea for someone, that payment flow. Keep everybody involved, but fix it. Make it so that, it is as easy as using a credit card. There you go. There's your value prop. Healthcare payments as easy as using a credit card.
Perfect. Well, Kate, thank you for your time on the K in Clarity podcast. I think we touched on a lot of amazing topics, from, go to market operations, from all your other experience and strategy. I think you've done a lot. And so what are your final thoughts?
I really enjoyed this conversation. Had a blast talking with you. Super excited for what's next. And, if you are interested in entrepreneurship, like the biggest thing that I talk about is just launch, just sell. I know how scary it is, but if you're thinking about it, especially if you are in the healthcare workforce today, you would be surprised at how well you're probably going to do. And so I really, really encourage it. I think healthcare isn't going to change for the better unless we start taking it upon ourselves to build businesses. And I would challenge companies too, right? So I challenge health systems and I challenge payers and I would even challenge employers to offer entrepreneurship opportunities. I think UPMC did this incredibly well, but if you're an executive, if you're the CFO of either a payer or a health system, go walk your hospitals during a night shift and listen to how many literally $50 million plus ideas your clinical staff has. You know how to execute them. You're a health system, for goodness sakes. Like, take your corporate development arm and start an entrepreneurship program. That is one. If you're a payer, CFO, your care management team, right? I know a lot of them are working from home today. Listen to those calls, listen to the nurse navigators, listen to customer service. Seriously, it is worth the hour. You will absolutely hear of opportunities that, again, you have entrepreneurial people working for you. Take that corporate development arm, go start an entrepreneurship program. I 100% know from having walked these halls, from walking night shifts, every single healthcare organization has at least $50 million in untapped potential sitting inside of it through the ideas of their current workforce. So it's on us to support that.
That's absolutely. And my mom works in the health system, so I know exactly what
Does
you're
she?
talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for the conversation and the time to chat. I know you post on LinkedIn. I know you have a Substack. So where can people choose to connect with you if they choose to do so?
Yeah, I always recommend LinkedIn. I'm super active on there. Kate McGinley, come and look me up. It's /Kate McGinley, all one word, but that's the best place to connect with me. And I love healthcare. It's fascinating to me. So always happy to help and share what I know.
Okay. Well, Katie, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was great.
Bye.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.